And for more, I'm joined now by Washington Post political reporter Eugene Scott. So, Eugene, I want to start with this Cohen sentencing, obviously. 3 years in prison. Does the president walk away from this politically unscathed?
Not at all. I mean, the reality is that Michael Cohen is known to the American public because of Donald Trump. The president vouched for his character and his ability and his skills. And the reality is that what has been revealed is that he wasn't a man of high character. And I think what's very interesting is that it's not just President Trump who does not walk away unscathed, but the Republican Party as a whole. Cohen wasn't just Trump's lawyer. He was the deputy finance chair for the Republican National Committee. That means the deputy finance chair for the GOP will be serving prison time for financial violations in trying to get the Republican nominee from the 2016 presidential election elected.
You know, it also raises questions about whether the president's own actions were legal. Some Democrats have been hesitant to talk impeachment, we know, leading up to midterms as well. But because of today's sentence, do you think they're more likely to actually move forward in this direction come the new year?
Absolutely, but I think the Democrats are still waiting to get more information. As we know, the investigation is still going on. New people will be spoken with. There's more information to be gathered from people like Manafort and Flynn as well. And so the Democrats are likely to just wait it out a bit to get more information to know for sure if this is something that they want to do. You have to remember that there's some Democrats who went to Congress campaigning not on prioritizing impeachment, and so that's going to be at the top of many people's minds in Congress who do not want to be seen as going back on campaign promises so early in their administration.
You know, the president told Reuters he's not concerned about impeachment at all. He thinks that people would revolt if that actually happened. Is he onto something there, Eugene?
Well, we do think the president is actually concerned, just like we think that many of the things he has said in terms of not caring about what's happening with Mueller just aren't true. But there are people in his base who would revolt, who would express frustration. But it's important to realize that only 25% of American voters self-identify as Republicans, and not even all of them are among Trump's base. So could there be a revolt? Sure. Will it be significant? The numbers say otherwise.
So meanwhile, we know we're watching this looming government funding deadline. The president, Republicans, Democrats all struggling to reach a deal. Boy, was that epic. It boiled over in the Oval Office yesterday. You know, I want to play for you what Senator Schumer had to say today.
And it is difficult, if nearly impossible, to negotiate with a president in front of the press who peddles such blatant and dangerous falsehoods. And because Leader Pelosi and I simply didn't go along with him, President Trump threw a temper tantrum and promised to shut the government unless he got what he wanted. Evidently, the Trump temper tantrum continued even after the meeting, with news reports saying he threw papers around the White House in frustration. And why did he continue? Because someone finally spoke truth to power.
So the president says that he'd be proud to take ownership of a shutdown. But what do Democratic leaders like Schumer have to lose at this point?
Well, what they have to lose is the idea that they perhaps were not able to get everything they wanted accomplished from that meeting. But what Pelosi and Schumer both know is that that meeting was a start, not an end. So they still do have time. There are people who perhaps don't think that Schumer and Pelosi were aggressive enough. These are people who voted for Democrats in 2018, hoping that they would, win control of the House and push back on Trump's administration. But it's still early in this process, and the winners are still to be determined. I will say Trump definitely, despite the panning that perhaps happened across the board, did look like a winner to those in his base. The problem is very few people are in his base when you look at the electorate, and if he's a winner to his base but the wall doesn't happen at all, it's not worth a significant win looking at the big picture.
Yeah, you know, that wall is so important to the president. On Twitter, the president actually pointed out the terror attack in France as a result, as a reason to sort of fund that border wall. But I mean, the alleged attacker is actually from France, not Mexico. This type of tactic keeps happening. But do you think ultimately, Eugene, does this help or does it hurt the president's case for that border wall?
I think it hurts the president's case with the electorate overall. His base, and even Republicans not in his base, when you look at some research and polling heading into the 2018 election, are most unified around immigration issues. So the border wall is a big deal to many people who back Trump. And it is one of the campaign promises that Trump made on day one that he's been consistent with sticking with, even though he's changed it a bit here and there. If you remember, he said that Mexico would pay for it. Now he's entertaining the possibility that American taxpayers would pay for it. But overall, it hurts Trump with the electorate because at least 50% of Americans say they don't want a border wall. And so we see the president pushing forward an idea that many Americans aren't on board with.
Senator Schumer asked Republican lawmakers to help pull the president back from a shutdown. What role do Republican leaders have in all this?
I think Republican leaders are going to have the responsibility of convincing Trump that what he is advocating for may not be in the best interest of his base, his supporters, and Republican voters overall. Sometimes you make pledges and campaign promises that once you have more access and knowledge about an issue, which the president now has as a occupant of the Oval Office, opposed to one of 16 people competing for a job among his political primary, you know more and you know better, and it's okay to pivot. I think what they're going to have to do is try to convince him that this thing that he believes he can't move on, he perhaps needs to move on a little bit.
Remember when they used to run soap operas at 1 o'clock and networks across? You don't need to do that. You just stream the news and it's engaging enough.
It absolutely is. It absolutely is. You know, the president was criticized for perhaps wanting to put on a show reminiscent of his days in reality television. And I will say, the way that people have been talking about it, you could argue mission accomplished.
Yeah, you know, he certainly gets reality TV, no question about it. Eugene Scott from the Washington Post, thank you so much for joining us, Eugene.
Thank you for having me.